Okay, so here, this is what the PHP project page should look like. What I'm going to go over today is I'm going to show you some examples, some differences and similarities between coding in PHP and JavaScript. All right, so here we've got the Panfilo's PHP website. So for this first one, I'm going to change this link for today's example. So let me exit this. So I go into the includes because that's where I have my menu. And I need to update the menu. So I open up the menu.php. And I'm going to call this just examples, examples.php. So after saving that, if I refresh the browser, I now have my link to the examples page, which does not currently exist. Let me create it, examples.php. Okay. There we go. So now we've got the basic includes in there. So that's the header, and let me create the footer. So first, let me comment this. So I save it, reload the page. All right. So that is our PHP menu. So we're set to start. Now let's create a loop in both PHP and JavaScript, and see how they differ. So first I'm going to create one in PHP. Okay, so here we have for I is equal to 0, while I is less than 10, add 1 to I, and then print out or echo out I am inside a PHP for loop, and then the contents of the I variable. So I'll save it. Let's reload the page. Okay, so made a little mistake here. Forgot the $sign. There we go. All right, so the loop is working, but it's all being displayed in one line. Let's add a break line. There we go. Now that's what that's supposed to look like. So I'm gonna now move this text. I am inside a PHP for loop, and I'm gonna put that into a variable. I save it, I reload the page, and it should look exactly the same. And just to make sure that it is actually displaying what we want, I'm gonna add an extra character there, and it should update automatically. Okay, so this is just a basic for loop in PHP. Now let's create the same thing, but in JavaScript, so we can compare the differences. Okay, so here we've got the JavaScript. We're declaring our variable text. Let text is equal to I am inside a JavaScript for loop. So we're storing a string, and then we've got our for loop, right? And if you compare the JavaScript for loop with the PHP for loop, they are nearly identical. The only real difference that you will notice is that for PHP, we have the $sign in front of the variable. Same thing when we're declaring the variable. However, for the JavaScript, we don't have a $sign because we don't use it for that portion. So that's pretty much the only difference. The way that the for loop functions is quite literally the same. Right, so then both of them have curly brackets to encapsulate the code in between. And then when we display the text on PHP, we have echo. And then within the parentheses, if we're going to be concatenating it with text, inside we are echoing out the $text variable strings. And then we have a space, and then we have the contents of the I variable. So each time it iterates, it adds 1 to I. So it starts with 0, and then once it reaches 10, then it exits out that loop. On our JavaScript, we have our document.write, and then we have I'm using a p tag to make sure that each time that it writes it, it's in a separate line. Right. Then I exit out of the string, and I use the plus sign to concatenate the contents of the text variable. And then I concatenate the contents of the I variable. So we have I am inside a JavaScript for loop, and every iteration it adds 1 to I, and it ends with adding the closing p tag. So let's see this in action. And here we go. You can tell that this is, here we're using a p tag, whereas inside the PHP we're not. So let's now change that and with a break line inside the JavaScript code. And let me add a horizontal line in between both of them. Now they both look nearly identical. The only difference is this dash. So let's go ahead and fix that. Let's add the dash to our text. And so now at this point, when you look at them, they both look pretty much the same, but we're using two different methods to display the contents of this for loop. But as you've seen, they both function exactly the same way. Let's look at the page source and see how that looks. So when I look at the page source, here we have the start of the PHP loop. And you can see inside the PHP loop, it's all just HTML that is printed out. Right, I am inside a PHP for loop, 0, BR, I am inside a PHP loop, blah, 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 blah. However, when we look at the portion for the JavaScript, we actually see the JavaScript itself. Right, so what does this tell us? This tells us that PHP code is run on the server. So the server generates all the HTML code and it sends that to the browser. Whereas in JavaScript, that's a front end that's executed by the browser itself. So the server, all it does is it sends the JavaScript itself to the computer. So it's a lot less text that's being sent through the internet, through the network. And the browser itself or your computer is responsible for generating that code. Right, so from a load perspective, on the server, it is less CPU intensive for it to send JavaScript, thereby being able to support more connections. But the flip side is that your computer needs more processing power in order to interpret the JavaScript code. On the flip side, PHP is more heavy on the server because it's having to actually run the code on the server to generate all the HTML information to then send to the computer. It increases the bandwidth utilization, But on your computer, your browser has very little processing to do. It doesn't have, it's very light on your computer's processor. Right, so that means that if you're accessing a page that was created with PHP, then you can use a relatively low-powered system, right? Whereas if you have a heavy JavaScript site, then your computer needs to have more processing power. So there's pros and cons. They have different uses. But in short, this is just a quick example of the similarities between doing a for loop and variables with both PHP and JavaScript.